Hello. What is life and how do we see life? It's a question that we always ask ourselves. But life is a gift. And if we take that gift the way it is and acknowledge that the way it comes, it is just very powerful. Today, I'm here with Melissa Horrell, an entrepreneurial spirit who's traveled the world several times over and has settled on the lower mainland of BC to call her home. Born in Uganda to an I-6 agent and a mother who's a history professor, Melissa traveled, and her perspective through that travel has shaped her. And she's here with us to share those life lessons and how she found meaning in starting a business. We're actually here at the Cave Cure Therapies, one of the Langley's newest and innovative wellness center that is aiming to transform how we look at health. Welcome, Melissa.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming on the show. And I'm in your cave therapy spa. It's so beautiful. And thank you for giving me the tour. It's just, I feel like I'm actually in a cave and I'm connected to this nature. And it's just beautiful.
Thank you. Yes. We brought in a lot of natural elements. Absolutely. We brought in stone. We've got foliage. We've got honeycomb. We've got cedar planks, wood, like a stalactites, I guess, a little bit stalactites. We've got that should be a waterfall.
Wow. The way you traveled, like it was when we were speaking over the phone and you talked about it and you traveled so much. You traveled 30 countries and you have lived in probably 8 to 9.
That's right.
How does that all started for you? Traveling, did you say I'm going to pack my bag and just travel the world? Traveling the world?
No.
Because some people there, I'm going to just travel the world.
Yes.
But I just want to know, how did you came up with that one, travel the world, and how it transformed you?
Yes, that's a great question. Started with my family. So parents worked for the government. So that already as a child, there was a lot of movement. Like you said, I was born in Uganda and spent time in Uganda, growing up, Nigeria, New York, Brussels, and then really at that point I sort of left home and went off and continued like constantly seeking languages, culture, knowledge, enlightenment, if you want to call all of that really. I mean, I learned Spanish, Italian when I was there, spent time in those countries, just very inspired by the architecture and the culture. And then flowed into travels to India and Nepal and just I was seeking answers and different phases, like the language is one phase. And then really the seeking came a little bit later in my 20s when I started a sales job. I was working in a press agency actually in London, sort of glamorous job on the outside, lots of travel, lots of connecting, lots of really fun activities, but soulfully just quite sad, depressed, anxious, just wasn't for me. And so I took off on a soul searching trip to India, Nepal, Vietnam, Thailand actually, and I had friends who wanted to come with me, and I was like, no, this is something I need to do by myself. And I took my journals, and I have like books of just scribbles that I wrote while I was away, and probing questions I'd ask myself, what is the purpose? What's my meaning? Why am I here? I'm not designed to be in an office. Like, what is my goal? So I really asked a lot of those questions, and the journey was beautiful. It took me to war, as we mentioned, which I'll get into in a bit too. But really, I think part of that was also the education that I learned along the way. I learned a little bit about Eastern medicine and how they find the root cause of disease as opposed to just popping a pill. There's a lot of information on Buddhism when I was in India that I absorbed that I really enjoyed, and I felt like actually it was a philosophy for life for me too. Mm-hmm. And that was very transformational because I didn't have a lot of spiritual guidance growing up, and so this for me was like I was like breathing and drinking something new.
So when we were speaking behind the scenes here, and you were talking about your growing up.
Yes.
And I know you talked about, of course, your parents were very highly educated. They worked for the government, but then you had a brother.
Yes.
And a little bit tell us about that, because when I mean, it's important for the audience to know that too, because when you're soul searching and everything, it's all relates the life, who we are today are our experiences from our past. And we kind of do the searching and who it kind of forms us who we are today. And it's important to know that, because I think that's such a powerful story you have there with your brother.
Yes, absolutely. So my brother is was a year older. And I would say, like I said, like there was a diagnosis that came later on when he was at university. He had a nervous breakdown, and that was when he was diagnosed with actually schizophrenia. And but prior to that, of course, there was a lot of friction in the house.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember the very first time I noticed something not quite right. We were in a social situation, and I just energetically, I thought something's not connecting with him and other people. And really, I look back now, and the more that I've learned about Asperger's and autism, I would probably say he was on the spectrum. But I don't think that was diagnosed at such a young age. And people didn't know about that stuff back then either. And we were in Europe, in Brussels, and actually that was going back to when we were in New York. And you had fun with your friends, and a little bit odd. It was extremely bright, so it all just, kind of, we didn't see it. We didn't really pick up on it. And as we journeyed on, and it was really when we left New York, where we had a great foundation of friends and family. We moved to Brussels, where things actually really got rocky. And there was the anger, the depression, the fights. The fights were really bad. And just, I remember saying to my mom, he's a little bit like Jekyll and Hyde. One minute he is happy and okay. The next minute he's so angry, and he's like, I wouldn't quite say he put his fist through the wall at that point, but there was that kind of anger brewing. And so as a family, it was challenging, and we didn't always understand it. And even when he got his diagnosis later as schizophrenic, the symptoms that came from that too were so hard for any family to be able to maneuver and understand. And I mean, it was like our whole world crashed. And of course there was tensions before because of the anger, but then suddenly it's like, what is this illness that he has? And there were times where I felt unsafe. Yes, I would. I have some stories there too. It depends how much you want me to go into detail.
Well, it's just, like as growing up, you go out with your friends, you're in school, and you come home to be a safe place.
Yeah, right.
For you, that was sometimes not the safe place because of your brother's behavior.
Yeah.
And you talked about the soul searching, and you had given me this beautiful story about that you did not know the diagnosis. Right. And because of that, you went for certain soul searching too, to find your inner peace, but kind of keep his peace and work for him too, because he passed away.
Yeah.
And that affected you, and you for that kind of putting it together.
Yeah.
And where you are today.
Yeah, that's right.
So the reason I'm asking the question, because I think everybody, the audience who's watching, we all know we have ups and downs in our lives, and we do not know what our future holds. But where we are today is all form of what our past are.
Yeah.
And we take the best out of it and make the best out of for it today.
Yeah.
And you did that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you're right. There was a huge influence, even, coming to Vancouver and leaving that behind.
Mm-hmm.
So my brother was living in England at the time, to make that decision to leave him, because I was a carer actually for a while there. To make that decision to leave and to kind of build my own life was not easy.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I feel like it was led by spirits. I had a strong intuitive feeling about leaving England before I did. And, I had a vision of where it was going to be. And this is where I came. And I think there was a lot of internal work that was done. Because I have diary, again, all my diaries come back.
I love that. You just this is where you write diaries, you wrote at those.
And I remember there's times even with my brother, there's scribbles where it's I didn't know what was happening anymore, and I felt overwhelmed, and I was angry with my mom, and why wasn't she stepping up? And what about my dad? He didn't understand it. And why was I the one that had to help my brother at this point? All of us went through phases of picking up the pieces, right? Because mom couldn't cope anymore, and dad didn't understand it and rejected it. And I felt compelled to to help him and to be by his side. So when I left, I felt there was guilt, and there was like, there was a lot of emotions, and I don't know that I think I think there was a lot of healing that happened after I left, for sure.
And you talked about journaling because you found this book that you didn't even know. You were talking about that. After how many years did you discover? After 20 years, you discovered this journal that you wrote. Yeah. And in that, you wrote about your stories. And I would like you to share that story when you went on the plane and you went to India. Yes. You had a very specific story. Yes. And I think that is so brave of you how you did that. Yes. If you don't mind sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is my story. So I was traveling, as you know, I was due to go see some family members in Shimla, and I actually got in a tuk-tuk, and I said, can you please take me to the train station? I have to buy a ticket to Shimla. And of course, he took me to a travel agent who had other plans for me. And I walked in, and he just did such a great job of selling me on this beautiful, magical place at the foot of the Himalayas. He said to me, this is the space and the place where the British used to leave Delhi in the heat and go and spend their summers. It's on the lake. It's a houseboat, and intricately carved details of wood, and this architecture that you won't see anymore. And there's really no one up there because don't listen to what they say in the news, but it's a beautiful place. And I was like, okay, I'm intrigued by this place. And he made it sound beautiful, showed me some pictures, of course. And I thought, okay, I like the sound of this. I'm going to go. Why not? It's an adventure. Bought my ticket, went home, and turned on the TV because I was staying in a little hostel. And sure enough, what did they talk about? But it was all about the war in Kashmir. And I thought, oh my goodness, what have I done? I thought, no, okay, I'm going to go back. I'm going to return my ticket. I can't go. This is crazy. This is madness. I'm just being really naive. I can't do it. And then I showed up the next day, and he basically looked at me and said, yeah, you can cancel it, but basically you have to pay more on the cancellation fee. So really better to keep the ticket, and then you can decide whether you want to go or not. And I was like, oh, I was so angry. And so I went straight to the airport, and I remember showing up with my ticket, and I asked the little lady at the kiosk, I said, if you were me, would you go? Mm-hmm. And she looked at me and she said, only you can make that decision. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, I'm going. And on the plane I went, and I got there, and I landed, I took a taxi to a gondola. That kind of took me to another lake. Got on another gondola, took me to the houseboat, and it was stunning. I must say, it was incredibly beautiful, and probably one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to. It was smoky as the evening. I'd come in the evening, and it was smoky, and I mean, Dell Lake is a community on the lake. Mm-hmm. So I had like merchants coming by, trying to sell me jewelry, trying to sell me fruit. Like I felt like, okay, this is kind of fun. Called to Allah too, is very Muslim, right? And I was kind of in that zone. So I could, it's 4 hours, I think it is. There was that too. So like I just left my land, of the world that I knew of London, and landed in this completely different world. And really was able to kind of get back to my journals. Mm-hmm. And when I reread my journals, like I was saying, during COVID, I kind of dug them out, and I found an entry in there that the seed was planted to open a wellness center. And in my mind, that seed was planted actually much later on in life. It was when I started working in the spa industry. But my journal reminded me that actually that seed was planted pretty much 20 years to the day that we opened this place, that the wellness retreat was in the cards. Wow. And I remember it said something along the lines of, in the future as a wellness retreat. It seems very far away right now, but that is the vision.
Wow. Something like that. Yeah. So you had that vision. And what I liked about it, you just said that you just took the plane and went, even when you asked the lady there, and she's like, the decision you can make, and how you just went through with your instinct, like, I'm just going to go. Yeah. And when you said it was so beautiful, and the news were telling it's dangerous. Yeah. So that's where I'm like, of course the media is going to always portray the bad, the negative, but people are still living through that. Yes. They're still living a happy life. They're still living through that all chaos of the wars and everything when they are going with their life. Yeah. And you witnessed that. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. And actually I did some tours. I was there, like on a guided tour. I went around, and the culture, and I mean, it's interesting as there I was in my 20s. Yeah. And the only people looking after me are these this culture that I don't know. I don't speak the language, and I have people cooking, like feeding me, and I'm in cleaning up and everything, and I'm like, I can't really communicate with you. Anything could happen, and so of course you go to bed on the first night and you're like, oh my gosh, are they gonna like burst into my room and like, is this safe? Why am I here? And then that spirit of adventure calls and just says, well, this is the spirit of adventure, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So well, that's like first this is the journey. Like you just don't know what the future holds, but it's I always like I'd read somewhere, and it was actually a class I went to, Guru Singh, and he said like, we don't invent, it's already been invented. We just discover as our journey, as our life goes.
Yes. And that's such a great question, because often when I read that, I'm like, okay, so was the seed planted and the vision happened, or is that my destiny? And it was, and I got a glimpse of it, right?
Yeah.
So there is that existential question of like, which comes first? So it's beautiful. Yeah.
Now, you are such an entrepreneur, and to open this wellness center. Talk about that, because you just did not open a spa. It's way beyond a spa. And I just got this beautiful tour of your place where you have counseling, you have therapies. And that's where I said I needed to know your brother's story, because you have counseling classes there in this spa too.
Yeah.
So if you want to just, what exactly happens here?
Yes, absolutely. There's actually a plaque behind me in honor of my brother. It's actually a beautiful quote. I'm going to read it if I may.
Yeah, please.
It says, this was earmarked in one of the books that he had at home. After he passed, we found it. The traveler has reached the end of his journey. In the freedom of the infinite, he is free from all sorrows. The fetters that bound him are thrown away, and the burning fever of life is no more. The Dhammapada. And it's funny. My brother and I, he was a scientist. He did physics. So when we talked about the universe, we spoke about two sides of the same coin. And there are so many synergies with my brother, where there is that kind of light, the light and the dark, the yin and the yang, right?
Mm-hmm.
So really, he committed suicide in 2017, and Cave just kind of had its own life. The idea was planted with my husband, and there was just no stopping us. It just took off. And the vision was obviously to support families who need help, but also I have worked in one of the community societies that help people with mental health and disabilities, and know how hard it can be for families, not just people who have the mental illness, which also is very challenging, but families that have to go through it, families who experience depression or anxiety within their families or mental illness. And so being able to create like a hub of wellness where people can come and retreat and have all the different services that support them is the vision that we had for this place. And it goes from obviously mind, body, literally mind, body, soul. I know that's a bit of a cliche, but it is. We have the counseling for the mind. We have all kinds of body stuff, everything covered by extended health benefit and more. And then the energy work too, so shifting of energies and being able to work on that soul level as well. So yeah.
Beautiful. It's just like, and remember you talking to me again about the story. I think you were working in you have worked around the world in the spas, right? Yeah. And there was one time where you were volunteering, with I think it's the autism kids, or and you had a story when you went with the counseling within that. And if you want to talk, because I think it's so important to know, because then we figured out it's just not the psychologist or psychiatric help you need, but there's more than that needs a child or the person going through needs that.
That's right. Yeah. So when I worked, it was for CLS, Community Living Society, and one of the people that we were supporting was a young man with schizophrenia as well. I had two people with schizophrenia actually, but I remember his story in particular because I went to this psychiatrist with him, and what I witnessed there is very similar to what my brother used to tell me about his appointments with a psychiatrist, which is very medical. Basically you're going there, you have schizophrenia, I'm going to give you your drugs and off you go. And I'm going to monitor your symptoms. If you're off your drugs, I can probably tell. I'm going to make sure you get back on it. I'm going to up your dose, lower it, depending on how you're feeling. well, that's it. That's all you get. You don't get any counseling. You don't get any support. You don't get any guidance. You don't get any like direction on how to live your life or how to get support. Like there's nothing else there. And so going and seeing that interaction like really made me understand a little bit more about my brother and wondering what other support could be given. And so just tied into a story here, I had a lady come in. She's got 2 autistic children. And the way she advocates for her kids, like brings tears to my eyes because she knows how important it is to advocate. And I feel that is such a powerful tool. And if I had like a message to provide to families who've got family members or children who are struggling with mental health or autism, is that advocation piece. Because I think, especially in the past, not so much these days, but I feel that there wasn't the knowledge, there wasn't the voice. People didn't know how to talk about it, and there is stigma, especially around schizophrenia. You say that, and everyone's like, "Oh, there's a dark cloud," right? And it's not easy. And so I think really it's about advocate for your children, speak up, get help, come to places like this where we understand what that all means. We're all here, we all get it, we've all had our experience with that kind of stuff, and we're very open, and that's what we're here to help.
How beautiful. Going back, another question, you were born in Uganda, and you have traveled around the world now, so many countries. Are you still in contact with your birthplace?
Yes.
How do you keep in contact?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in my 30s, I went back to Uganda. And I hadn't been back for 30 years, 35 actually. And I set myself a task. I wanted to, there's an orphanage I wanted to help. And I had two other contacts of people that I wanted to visit. And I ended up going over there and doing some work for this orphanage. And originally I was going to do some hands-on work at the orphanage itself. But when I arrived, it turns out that I didn't really have the skill set needed because a lot of it was labor manual work that needed to be done. And it was the summer, the kids were actually away. So I was like, well, I can't leave what I'm helping is my purpose. So I had a long chat with the director, and he had given up his room for me for the night. And I felt a little bit uncomfortable about that too. Like, his wife are now sleeping on the floor in the living room. And I'm like, I don't feel necessarily that comfortable. Nonetheless, I had a long chat with the director. We looked at their books. I'm like, what do you guys need? Like, how can I help you? What can I do to assist you? And so he looked, he explained their day-to-day, their life. And one of the things he came up with was transport. I need transport. So I was like, okay. I said, well, listen, I think my skill set is maybe networking. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to network. I'm going to organize a fundraiser, and I'm going to get you a bus. And he was like, God willing. I remember saying that, God willing. And I thought, okay, what have I just promised this man? I really did. And I, like I said, I knew about two people, and I called the one person that I knew. I said, can you please come pick me up? And then I said, I just made a promise that I'm going to do a fundraiser for this guy, and then I'm going to get a bus for him. Am I crazy? And he's like, actually, no, I've been wanting to do a fundraiser too for a while, so I'll help you. And of course, it all went from there, and we raised $12,000 and got him their bus, and it was quite something. So still very connected to them. I get beautiful letters from them, like, we love you, we miss you, we thank you, that kind of thing. And then of course I also have other friendships that I developed while I was there, that I maintain too.
And you go for a different purpose, but you end up doing some different purpose,
Yes.
what you did.
Yes,
that's beautiful. That's life. That's how it unfolds.
Yes.
Like, when we talk about life, like, what is life?
Yeah.
You went for a purpose to do humanitarian work, and they were not there, but you end up doing a fundraiser for them. And let's say you had very interesting parents.
Yes.
Like your father with the MI6, like he's a spy, like it's like a James Bond.
Yes.
And then your mom was a professor in history, and you belonged to very educated and successful parents.
Yes.
How was that for you as growing up? How was the pressure because you belong to these parents who are very educated and they are successful? Because there are a lot of children who feel that pressure, but then there's that balance and how that shaped the relationship between the parents and the child.
Yeah. It's a great question. I can safely say that there are times where my mother, my brother, my dad, and my stepfather, at one point they divorced too, very intellectual, academic. My brother also got his master's in physics. Not so much my line, my direction, right? Not as I'm really not academic. I've studied, got my MBA, and I've also started my master's in business, but not to the same capacity and not to the same interest. So yes, I had to curve my own path, and there were definitely moments of questioning. I think that's a great way of putting it, like really questioning, who am I? What's my purpose? Like, as you know, right? And then the voices of your parents in your head. I mean, it took a lot of work to, and not disrespecting my parents, because they're, like you said, there's an intelligence there that I look up to, but just because that's not me. Like, you stop those voices in your head that are your parents, and you got to find your own voice, right? Mm-hmm. And so that took a fair bit of work. But through that, and through my brother not being well, like, there was a lot of anxiety. Like, that's really, I think for me, that's sort of healing. The journey started to, and the travel was like soul searching, but there was so much anxiety around my brother. Like, he disappeared a couple of times, like, where is he? So there was a lot of, I remember at the time, like, literally getting a pack of cigarettes and smoking it in like 3 hours, because I was so anxious about my brother disappearing, and I felt like it was partly my fault. But that's not sustainable, right? So then that was when I discovered Reiki, for example. First time I ever had Reiki, it was the most calming thing that ever happened to me. And I just felt like, wow, this is actually what I feel like when I'm normal, like when I'm centered. And that was a beautiful experience. I'll never forget that. So that was very much part of the healing journey. I went to see a counselor. I've tried, obviously, massage. I even studied massage and aromatherapy, and reflexology. And then what else did I try? I had a car crash, and I've done the physio, I've done the RMT, all of that too. So really, delved quite deep into all the services that we offer here, which is also what kind of directed my path in life too. My career, I started off hands-on, learning massage, learning aromatherapy, reflexology, and then getting recruiting into management, and then really had a sort of an aptitude for management and business, and worked my career just mainly in the spa and clinic. That was pretty linear. Like, it only took one detour, which I'll get into in a second, but it's been pretty linear, because that was my passion. I found it when I went traveling, and it helped me so much. Like, there was all the different elements of the therapies that I tried obviously helped me evolve. The only detours when I went and set up an art gallery on Granville Island for a couple of years. It was my entrepreneurial spirit coming alive, and really tying into actually yoga at the time. I did Kundalini Yoga, and there was a reason I chose Kundalini over some of the other yogas, because I was in Kits. I was living in Kits at the time, scouting the area for different yoga groups, and I came across Yoga West, Kundalini, and I thought, spiritual yoga. Yeah. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. I needed spiritual direction, still looking to grow in that area. And it was when I started those classes that actually the entrepreneurial spirit, the energy, like the alignment happened. And I was like, okay, I got to take the bull by the horns of my life, and I'm going to open this art gallery. And I went off traveling, by the way, went to Indonesia, went back to Africa, gathered up some bits, put them in a container, shipped it back to Vancouver, went down to Granville Island, did a tour of some of the stores. I was like, this is the one. It's the one I like. It had 2 levels to it. I was like, I can see art at the top. I can see all the trinkets down here. And boom, the art gallery popped up. Still there. I sold it. It still exists. It's changed. Obviously, it's not quite the same, but that was my kind of entrepreneurial spirit coming forth as well. And I couldn't ignore that. But other than that, it's been fairly linear through the whole kind of clinic and spas, and just experiencing all different types. Yeah. Going back to the challenges of having intellectual and academic family, I would say one of the biggest ones was that my parents very often are living in their intellect and their mind. And it was a challenge, and there was a lot of confusion and angst and anxiety, because I was a little bit disconnected from my heart. And so a lot of the healing and a lot of the searching was to be able to just sit in your heart and find that voice that comes from the heart, not from the mind, and to follow the passion of the heart, not the mind. So this has been actually huge for me. And that was a lot of the work I've done on myself too. It's been about like finding and following the heart. Because the intellect, yes, I can activate that, but to really find happiness, I believe, comes from the heart.
And did you do you think that, there's a saying, you conquer your mind, you can conquer the world, because you probably learned that in Kundalini, where your mind says something, but it's mind, and there's like, your mind can be make your mind as your servant. Don't make yourself your mind servant.
Yes. The power of shunya, which is that still point when you meditate, where everything is balanced and it's just stillness.
Yes.
And then you can listen to your heart.
Then you listen to your heart. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yes. So how would you describe your journey, your path from where you were to where you are today? How did that unfold for you? How would you describe that? We all have sorrows, we all have pains, because you went through a lot of mental pain going through, right? Because of around at home and just searching. But what was the best part of everything unfolded for you, that you were just in an aha moment, one of those moments where like, wow?
That's a great question. I do feel that the yoga teacher training was a huge transformation for myself. There was a huge alignment of energy that happened during that time. It was a nine-month course, and just elevated energetically, got rid of a lot of the mental garbage that goes on in the brain, just connected to like energetic soul level, if you want. And really since then, I would say that for me was a big transformation. I changed. I let go of a lot of bad habits too. I mean, I was in my 20s, 30s, party girl. I was living in, it was London, it was parties, it was, alcohol, drugs, all the rest of it. And I just let it all go. So, and that was huge for me. That was a big transformation. So energetically felt much better. And then really evolving forward from that, I have actually a really good friend of mine called Amr, and I remember him once saying, this is just before I met and rekindled with my husband, he was talking about mastery, but elevation as well, and he was one of my buddy in the yoga training, and I remember he was talking about elevation, and I was thinking about this on one of my walks, and I got a message from my now husband, and he was inviting me to come and see to come visit him, and for some reason those words were resonating in my head, and I was like, okay, I've got to go see this man, and 2 months later Jordan and I were engaged.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's so I think there's been that Kundalini was very transformational for me.
Wow. It is such a beautiful story, and I think you shared with us that there are so many people out there who's watching this today, or looking at it, and they all may be lost, but then there's such thing as, there is something like a soul searching, and it's always learning, and it's always evolving. It never stops. So if anybody is going through that, don't give up. You would just keep on going. You just don't know where the life's going to unfold. That's a beauty. Like the first half of your life, you have been doing soul searching.
Yes. That's right. Yeah.
So what is the next half holding for you now?
So that's a good question. I know that a lot along my path, there's been a lot of meditation.
Yeah.
It's been very powerful, actually, a very powerful tool. Like if there's one tool that I would, I wish maybe one day I'll teach, who knows, is meditation, mainly because it keeps that clarity and that focus. And, mornings you wake up and you're like, what should I be working on? Because you're wearing so many hats as an entrepreneur. Just take a moment and the answers come. And that's beautiful. And I think really for the journey of myself and healing in cave, we would love to see multiple locations and to help more people and expand that reach. And even as an entrepreneur in cave, there's been so many different evolutions already within this. And, from the stress of opening to questioning too, there's that pain within that, as the growing pains of opening a business. Are we going to survive? Are we not? COVID, pandemic, let's just give it up. I quit, all these feelings too that come with it, but then turning around and be like, oh my gosh, we've grown so much, and look, suddenly we have full staff, and the energy so positive, and we created this. So there's there's the struggles, but we're we're growing, right, and blooming. And that's actually a beautiful part of the journey for sure.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Because life is just beautiful. I always say, like, it just, it has all these surprises there for us. So what is one message you will give it to our audience today?
Honestly, I would say just follow your heart and let the answers come to you. Follow your heart, do a little meditation, and come visit us at Cave.
Yes. You have to visit the cave. It's right in Langley, right by the chapters. It's a beautiful space. Everything in one. We are sitting right here and I see a coffee bar right behind us.
Yes.
It's just, it's like
Yeah.
it's a home. It's like a happy place. It's like a homely. I'm walked in, I feel like I'm walking into a home.
Yeah.
And that its comfort is welcoming.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us today. And we had an amazing conversation with Melissa. And I hope you had some insights through her journey. And please visit her, the cave right in Langley, right by Chapters. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. And thank you again for joining us. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for watching. Leave a note in the comments and I would love to hear from you. To find links and additional resources from the show, visit amangill.com. See you on the next episode, and until then, stay inspired.